The report says that PwC have done is that there's no systemic gender bias in the way that pay has been set. That doesn't mean to say that there aren't differences in men and women's pay. What the report is saying there is that gender has not been the basis of the decision making that people have used when they have set somebody's salary.
Isn't the real reason that you don't want to admit that gender has been an issue, a specific issue, is that that gets you into legal problems and you then have to start paying back pay for 6 years to anyone who can show that they're a victim of it, and that's just too expensive for the BBC to contemplate without having nightmares.
Well, I think that what the report is saying is it might apply in some cases that there is an equal pay issue, but there's no systemic issue.
Can you imagine 6 years back pay for people in those cases where you think gender has been an issue?
If we have broken the law in an individual case, then we will have to address that, yes. I think that part of the reason, though, that there is this discrepancy because the gender pay gap is not the same as equal pay.
No, because that's two people in the same job earning very different amounts.
And some of the reasons why two people in the same job may be earning different amounts of money, the law says you have to justify it. So there might be justifiable reasons why two people in the same job are on different salaries. And those criteria will be around how long has the person been doing it, what is their profile with the audience, does the audience tune into the programme because of that person, in which case there is not an equal pay claim under the law. But of course those are things which have to be justified, and they might open to debate as well, of course.
A lot of the BBC argument has been the BBC was disproportionately employing men in the era when money was a little bit looser, and then diversity came along. BBC made a big effort on that, really just at a time when austerity was beginning to bite and the money was much tighter. Would you acknowledge there was systemic gender bias in the period, say, more than 5 years ago, when the BBC was recruiting more men, or a disproportionate number of men?
Quite possibly, although there might have been a smaller pool of women from whom to choose for all sorts of social reasons. And that's something that we have to address going forward.
In the Carrie Gracie case, and I don't want to focus too much on her, she's been at the BBC 30 years, Jeremy Bowen's been at the BBC 30 years, pretty different salaries. I mean, I wonder whether you think, as you look at the salaries, as you gazed and eyeballed at them like everybody else did when many were published last year, did you not think, that looks strange, that looks a bit weird?
Yes, we did. We very much did, yes. These salary issues were a matter of individual negotiation up to a point. It was sort of within a framework. They were confidential matters, and we were not setting them vis-a-vis other people in quite the way that we should have done. And disclosure, I think, has thrown a very uncomfortable light on that for us, which needs to be addressed.
You had access to that data before the rest of the world did. So the rest of the world saw it last July and said, that looks a bit weird. You could have said that any time, you know, and you could have just looked at it and said, that looks a bit strange. And you were strangely incurious, I suppose, in not having raised this before. Well,
I think it's around really not having a proper framework in which to do it. And that's what this report introduces now, which says, this is, if you work on this type of programme, this is the type of salary that you can expect to be paid within a range, recognising various factors. And that's what we didn't do before. That's why I think a lot of women quite reasonably are saying this was not transparent.
Strange that you didn't even do it knowing that they were going to be published last July. You had, what, a year's warning or thereabouts that they would be published.
Well, I think there was...
Did you not even eyeball them and say, before the publication, we've got a problem looming here, we as the bosses ought to probably sort this out and make sure we've got something to say to staff who are obviously going to perceive anomalies all over the place, many of which appear quite gender specific?
I think there was a bit of that, but not enough, and I would accept the premise of your question that we should have been onto this earlier.
The eyes of the country are very much on the BBC and its pay formation at the moment, and people will be interested if the BBC finds a system that is replicable elsewhere. If you have this BBC system and you have a rate for a job, I don't know, presenter of the 10 o'clock news, and you've got a range for that job, and then you want to employ someone from outside who is on a higher salary than in that range. What do you do?
It's a really good question which we have thought of, and I think that we were taking the view that we will have to stick within the ranges broadly, but what has changed, I do believe, is the market for news presenters. Now, the BBC has been discounted anyway, according to the market, but I think that we will be continuing with that as a process.
But what you're saying is you will not employ someone higher than that range, and if they won't come for the going salary,
I think there will be more of that, yes, than there has been in the past, because if we don't apply that, that is how things do get very out of line.
Do you see over the next 5 years the BBC saving money or spending money on reforming its pay?
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. That's probably, it might be that in the short term it's spending and in the long term it's saving. We haven't run the numbers on that. We're still hearing approximately 200 or odd cases. I do think, though, that this is going to be a fairer, more transparent, more justifiable to both the public and to our workforce way of paying people.
Fran Unsworth, thank you very much.
Thank you.